Hello and welcome to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and we'll be talking about all things cloud. Now in this session we're going to be doing something slightly different. We've got another guest and I'm very happy about the guest that we've got today. But we're going to be talking about a different kind of topic today, one we haven't really talked about so far. And it's kind of interesting we haven't talked about this one yet, because you could argue this is really a cornerstone of what we need to think about in the cloud. So you know the deal. If you enjoy the content, please like, please subscribe, please follow, and you can be sure to get even more great content. Now we're going to be kicking off something exciting as well in the coming weeks. We're going to be doing a new mini-series called Architecting in the Cloud One Pattern at a Time. So again, if you're looking to start designing and building things in the cloud, that'll be a good mini-series for you to go and follow. We'll have tons of guests coming in to go and talk to you and learn from as you grow in this journey of cloud architecture. So, with those introductions done, what I want to do is just bring us over and think about today's topic. And I mentioned this is really a cornerstone, something very common and a foundation that you think about really when you're actually working in the cloud. So identity is actually the topic that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm very, very pleased to be joined by an old friend, an old colleague. I don't know how else I could describe him, but I'm sure there's many names. Christos, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, let's go to the names, because a lot of expletives can be said about me. Hey man, it's great to be here, by the way.
Awesome.
And true, we've known each other since 2016 when I joined the UK team.
Yeah.
Man,
has it been that long?
Were they glorious days back then? So much fun.
Man.
Yeah.
We had some good some good fun with customers as well. We were just talking about it before we went on air, right? Some of the fun stories we had to share.
You'll be surprised that I'm still getting picked for the Azure workload optimization.
Yeah, the Azure Solution Assessment. Yeah, I still see those emails coming in as well. It's good fun.
Some research coordinators go, "Hey, you've got you're certified for this. Would you like to go to this customer in the US?" I'm like, "Nah, sorry guys, I'm not even a PFP anymore. Plus, I wouldn't know where to start these days."
Ever changing.
Things move so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe
some amazing.
Maybe let's start then talking about, I guess, kind of the time we met. Maybe some of your background first, maybe for the folks who are kind of listening in and wanting to know who you are first, mate. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm a late bloomer. I started with computers fairly late in my life. It's funny because sometimes people ask like, why did you get into computers? Why did you get into programming and stuff? Yeah. And at some point in my life, I hit those crossroads. And I was fairly young, obviously, but I was like, what do I want to do with my life? Because a couple of things I tried did not really satisfy me. I was like, you know what? I want to be a hacker. I want to be hacking into people or protecting networks or whatever. And that was the vision back then, getting into security and hacking stuff. So nice. I was like, where do I start? I need to know some programming. So let's go and get a degree in software engineering. Yeah. Got a degree. Then I was like, I need to know about networks as well, because obviously as a hacker, how am I going to hack TCP and UDP, right? So I went and did a master's degree in networking.
Right.
Working with Cisco routers and switches and firewalls.
You've kept that one quiet. You never told me about that one.
I never told you about that one because I realized that at the time that I was doing the degree, obviously there was no cloud. It was back in 2004. Right. So cloud was in its very early infancy.
Okay.
But I also realized that a lot of the things or a lot of companies would manage network and their infrastructure remotely. So for example, if you were a company operating in the UK, most of the companies had a headquarters office, the headquarters in London, and then all the branches were managed by London. So I was like, there were very few networking jobs in Scotland. So I was like, you know what, I'll go back to software. And then I went back into writing code, and I fell in love with it so hard that I ended up staying. So
awesome.
I spent a few years working for a couple of companies, and then I moved into consulting in 2012. At that time, cloud and everything had really taken off, and I was always an early adopter. So through consulting, I got the opportunity to work on very many different things and different solutions, different clouds, different technologies, different languages. and you gain up a lot of experience. And one of these things I always dreamt about doing was joining something like Microsoft. Obviously, I was a Microsoft fanboy. I started with .NET in university.
Awesome.
And I kept it throughout my career. And in 2016, I became an MVP, which I think brought me to the radar of Microsoft. And then somebody on LinkedIn reached out to me and said, oh, dude, you want to come and join Microsoft as a PFE? I had no idea what a PFE was, and I thought it was a prank. So yeah, sure, I will buy it. Yeah, I'll say yes.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, 2 months later, I was working for Microsoft UK as a Premier Field Engineer, which doesn't exist anymore. I think it's a CSE,
Yeah.
the cloud.
Customer,
what are they?
Customer success engineer these days. Or that's it. Yeah, exactly.
God. I love naming Microsoft. So anyway, I was a PFE. I was in your team. We had an amazing time. The PSFE team in the UK was probably one of the best teams I've ever worked with.
Great team. Shout out to them.
And big shout out to all my buddies.
Yeah.
Ex and present.
Ex and present buddies or ex and present colleagues?
No, ex and present PSFD.
There we go.
We have still a lot of friends, but they are not with. They're not with the PSFD team anymore. I don't think it's even called PSFD.
No. I think that's all changed as well. Like we were saying earlier, all things are changing, right?
Left first. You abandoned the team first.
Yeah, I abandoned you first.
If Chris is leaving, I'm leaving.
Yeah, that was when I came into Azure engineering as well. Yeah, and we both followed a similar path on that front, right? Because I think I went into the customer success. Customer experience, customer success arm of Azure engineering, and that's where you first went. Where did you go first? Because it wasn't straight to the current role, was it?
No, it was not. No. I went to marketing.
That was it. Yes.
Boom! Surprise. So it was a bit of a weird role because although it was under marketing, it was a fairly technical role because the team I joined was all about developer tools.
Gotcha.
And when I joined the team, they had already this opening for about 8 months because it's easier to turn an engineer into a marketeer than turn a marketeer into an engineer, right? So you get somebody that has really good marketing skills but doesn't understand the tools. It's very challenging to say to them, hey, we just released this feature on Visual Studio and get them excited. They'll be like, okay, yeah, we'll do the usual marketing stuff, but it's not the same kind of passion. So I ended up working in marketing for about 2.5 years where I worked with a lot of different developer tools, including Visual Studio for Mac, including Xamarin for mobile development, and then all the Azure tooling, which was so much fun. So PowerShell, Cloud Shell, CLI, Storage Explorer. What else was there? Quite a few things.
I was going to say, we've got a growing portfolio as well, haven't we?
Yeah, I think I had 11 products at the peak of my marketing career, which was a lot of context switching because I had to coordinate with all these people and do releases and make sure that everything is landing okay. But working in marketing actually opened my eyes on how we do marketing at Microsoft, which is very different. So one of the things I did when I joined the team, I went to my manager, like, is there a course I can do as a marketeer to help me be successful? It's like, nah, the way we do marketing here is very different. So you have to learn the ropes on the job.
Build the plane as you fly. Awesome.
So 2.5 years in marketing. And now I'm back into doing a technical role. In fact, I work as a developer advocate PM for the identity division. And it comes full circle because we started as hacking and security, and I've managed to get back into security via identity, which is funny because I landed where I wanted to be at the beginning of my career. It just took me 15 years to get here.
But this is the thing, right? Like, I speak to a lot of people who kind of earlier in their career and mentoring and all this kind of thing, and that's one of the things is, how do you know what you want to do? And the trick is none of us have a clue, right? We're all kind of making it up as we go along and stumble into all these things as we go. And I was going to say, I love the fact that you've now kind of gone full circle and got into the identity and security space now as well. And it's worth shouting out as well. I'm just going to change the screen over to the screen share. That you're also doing a podcast as well, right? And not a podcast, but like a live stream, and you've got your own channel as well. So did you maybe want to just shout out for the viewers as well a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, in the era of COVID, because we're discussing about COVID up until now, many things have changed. So the traditional advocacy, the traditional dev relationship flow where you would go into, conferences and user groups and be out there and talk to people can't happen anymore.
Right.
And it's funny because when I joined the team, we were discussing yesterday,
Yeah.
first day I was in the office. I had not even been allocated an office, just to give you like a desk in the building. And on day 2, they said, well, you have to go home. We're working from home going forward. And I was like, damn, I barely met and saw the faces of my teammates. But we can't do dev advocacy in the traditional terms. And our plan was for always to scale through the different mediums. So try different things, go where developers are. So although we are still working with Channel 9, we're still working with our own channels. We also found that there's a big trend for developers to be in different spaces. So if you are a Python developer, if you're a Ruby developer, it's very unlikely that you're going to come to the Microsoft blogs to read about Python. It's very unlikely that you'll come to Channel 9 to learn about Python. You go to where Python people are, the Pythonistas, whether that's a forum or Twitch or something else. And our team is now trying to adopt this. We want to go where developers are, and we want to be closer to them. So Twitch is one of the mediums that we use to approach developers and work with developers,
we're
which
live
is great.
streaming it on Twitch right now as well.
We are indeed, yeah. And we'll do it every Friday and Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So we're doing it twice a week. On Fridays, we do the community hour where we give a shout out to anyone that has done anything with identity. So if you write a blog post, if you do a video, then let us know and we will give you a shout out. And then we include the links for everybody to go and read about your stuff.
Well, I've got an easy content one for you now, this episode.
Yeah, you do. But
awesome.
We also answer questions like, hey, I'm trying to do this with B2C and it doesn't work, or when is this coming? Is it in the roadmap?
Gotcha.
Is there a private preview? I'm having this issue with AMSAL. I'm trying to sort it out, and we will either try to answer it ourselves, or we will engage with the engineers. And we have a channel, we have an email, we have Twitter. In fact, this morning somebody pinged me on Twitter saying, "Hey, how do I whitelist?" We shouldn't be using whitelist.
Sure.
How do I allow list, the allow list and the deny list? How do I allow IPs for B2C? Yeah. Well, you can do it because obviously IPs change all the time. You could allow list all the public IP addresses for Azure, which also change, and there's a way to programmatically get them. But it might be easier to use something like API management or Azure Functions to proxy into your APIs, which are on-prem and behind a firewall. Yeah. And then since they will be acting as pass-through for authentication, you don't have to worry about how this will happen. So you don't have to allow list your B2C tenant. Yeah. But these are the questions that we get that we try to answer. So we're engaging with the communities where they are. And then after this one, after our stream, I have another stream in about an hour and a half.
Awesome.
I'm talking to you .NET Sheffield.
Awesome.
And it's funny, right? Because all these user groups, especially the .NET user groups in the UK, most of them have reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you come and do a session?"
You're a known face.
I remember I had to drive to them, or if I had a customer, nearby, it would be like, "Oh, I'm seeing this customer in Oxford," and then I will reach out to the .NET Oxford team and say, "Hey, would you like me to come to to your user group?" And now it's happening all over the web. And user groups have adjusted, communities have adjusted. Everyone is doing this online. I mean, there are challenges, like conferences online are not the same, and I do miss meeting my buddies and my friends and meeting new people as well, and having this kind of close interaction. But at the same time, we do the best that we can. So that was a long-winded answer about what I do these days.
No, it's good.
Advocacy.
And final thing before we kind of move on, but I was just thinking back, and it scares me that you were saying it was 2016 when you joined the team, 4 years ago. But anyway, we'll skip past that. I remember vividly how often we were talking about things like blog posts and all the work that you did in the community, and the fact that you're now back in this developer advocacy kind of persona role now as well. Again, full circle, and I love that. Really love that. Really happy for you.
I mean, I've been writing since 2012. I started writing blogs and doing stuff, and then in 2015, I silently got into the public speaking arena. Still trying to be good at it, but let's ignore that. But being out there and helping the community to be better and solve challenging problems, it's fun.
Gotcha.
And it's funny because I've always wanted to be a CDA, right? So for us, we have CDAs at Microsoft, Cloud Developer Advocates. Apparently now they're called CXAs because they're not just developers; they're data and machine learning and everything. So they became CXAs or CAs, whatever you want to call them. And I've brushed with that team so many times, like for 3 years, it was like almost getting in, and then not getting in. Like something will happen. I remember once I was speaking to Scott Kate, who is one of the PM leads in the cloud developer advocacy. We did a preliminary interview. He's like, "Yeah, you're in. We want you in the team."
Yeah.
And that was before a major reorg. So he calls me the next day and goes like, "Sorry, the opening that we had is gone."
Oh man.
It's like, how's that even possible? I was celebrating the night before, and then the next day I was told no.
Yeah.
So very close. Like I've always been around dev advocacy because it was my passion. Right? If I love something, I want people to know about it and people to use it as well. Whether it's .NET Core, whether it's Node, whether it's doing something with Azure, any service. I was always out there. So suddenly getting paid and being hired to do what I really love and I'm passionate about means that it's a dream come true.
Awesome.
And I'm super fortunate, super lucky to be in this team.
Awesome. So I guess anyone listening, you can kind of get Christos's passion there. So dev.to/4to5show. I think twitch.tv/4to5show as well. Tune in and take a listen there. And final question on that, 4to5 show, where'd the name come from?
See, that's a good question, right? So first of all, 45 is the Redmond area code. So we're the Microsoft show. So 45 is the Microsoft show, more or less.
Nice. And it's the identity of Microsoft, hence. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. But it's also an HTTP code. So if you know your HTTP codes, then 45 means too early. So when we're planning about doing the stream, my teammate, my partner in crime, JP, big shout out, he's actually East Coast. So we were planning like, what time should we do it? How should we do it? And he's like, let's do 10 a.m. It's like, yeah, 10 a.m. sounds perfect. Now, always discuss time zones with other teammates. So 10 a.m. for his time was 7 a.m. my time. So imagine you have to be up at 6, get the stream ready. So it's too early.
Yeah.
So 4 to 5 also means too early, and then our show was too early.
Gotcha. Awesome. I love the story behind that. Love that.
Yeah, it was interesting. We're thinking about 404 or
not found. Awesome.
403. So many different options, but 4 to 5 ended up being this kind of a double meaning.
Yeah.
So if someone says, well, this doesn't sound too Microsofty, well, can come back and say, well, it's actually super Microsoft because they're
Awesome. Cool. So I guess we've skirted around it, we've kind of talked about it, and let's kind of blend two topics together now that we've been talking about. And I guess one being identity, and one being that old world that we were in, where we were going out and help customers understand the types of solutions that they built and where there may be kind of pain points, where there may be challenges and these kinds of things. So maybe let's kind of start off at the beginning. Any good place to start? Good musical reference there. There we go. For anyone who hasn't seen before, I've got a load of musical posters just above me. I'm a big musical fanatic. Anyway, what do you see as kind of the trends right now, I guess, from an identity perspective? If we think of the big picture and what you see different people doing, what are they kind of working towards, and what's top of mind for folks at the moment from what you're seeing?
Well, identity is this thing that for us underpins everything. There is no way you can work with any services securely without having some kind of an identity provider underpinning everything. Now, ideally, we want people to be running things on Azure and work with Azure services. But as identity, we actually go way beyond just Microsoft. So if you are running, even Google Apps, you can authenticate using Azure AD. If you are doing enterprise stuff, if you are running on AWS and you need to secure your solutions, you can use Azure AD. It doesn't matter where you're running your solutions. So for us, we want to be as inclusive as possible. Now, you talk about trends. The biggest trend, obviously, in the last 10 years has been the cloud. Like everyone is trying to move to the cloud at different paces. And we've seen this before. We helped so many customers either get to the cloud from on-prem or actually, while they're on the cloud, to do it right, because it's very hard to get the cloud right from a costing perspective, security perspective, scalability perspective, so many different areas. But if we focus on the security side of things, we realize that people don't want to write identity. There's no identity developers unless you're working for us or Okta or Auth0. So we want people to do it securely and to do things right, spending the least amount of time. And in the cloud space, things have changed quite a bit. There's no this perimeter where everything is behind the firewall, so we're secure. Everything is on the edge. Everything needs to be secured in a very different way. So the boundaries have changed quite a bit. So we need to help educate developers. We need to help educate IT teams. We need to help educate networking teams and security teams about how things change. And one of these things is obviously identity, not just the user management perspective, but also how do my services communicate securely with one another? How do I make sure that my data is securely accessed? And disaster recovery and what have you. So we do have quite a few areas to cover, because identity is not just a username and password management, although it starts with that, but it expands to how do I use my API securely? How do I deploy to the cloud securely, right? Secure DevOps, it's a big thing these days. How do I eliminate secrets and API keys from my source code? Very important. And it's a concatenation of all these things, and we try to approach it with the right mindset. So if we are talking to customers about authentication and authorization, we'll bring that area there. But then we also try to bring a little bit of a more holistic approach. How do you write your apps? And we've seen it before, right? We went to customers to do these kind of assessments, and we would find all sorts of crazy stuff. I remember one story very vividly. Let's bring this on. We actually, me and you, walk into a customer. We went to do a workload optimization. It was a little bit of a hostile approach where I think the CEO walked into the room and he was not happy for us being there and about what we're doing. But the rest of the team was fairly open to the conversation. And as we were covering different areas, one of the areas was how do you manage your deployments to the cloud? And one of the guys just went and said, well, we deploy our ARM templates to Azure storage, and then we run a PowerShell script from there. Now, it turns out that their ARM templates had all the secrets and all the passwords and everything that was needed to deploy to production. And that storage account was a public storage account, no security whatsoever. And then they looked at each other, realizing what they said at that point. So it's like people will do stupid things without realizing what they're doing.
I think,
and it was
just to jump on that one, I vividly remember, I can't remember if it's the same customer or a different one. Again, we're going into reminiscing mode here, but a similar situation where we had someone senior coming in, we do the normal introduction saying we're going to talk about requirements and all these things. And you and I and folks listening will know about how much I drive requirements as being important for what we do and what, designing the right solution, a fit for purpose solution. And I remember this one particular character coming over and saying, right, we need to get on with this. We've paid for this service. We want to make sure that everything's working, blah, blah, blah. And we had to kind of reset that expectation and say, look, we are here to do all of that and make sure you do the right thing. But first we need to understand the context. We need to understand what you're trying to build and why, and, what happens if things do go wrong, because it's not an if, it's going to be a when. This is kind of the nature of cloud, is that things will happen, things will potentially go wrong. And it's about how you deal with that rather than actually going ahead and preparing or waiting for that to happen, if that makes sense. So, I remember this particular one where we had that question and then there was this answer if they need 100% uptime, they need this, they need that. And that's always my red alert, right? 100% uptime. Okay, right. Let me write that one down to the side for later. And then long story short, they come back and we ask them about their operations. How are you operating this? And there was a lack of clarity between the vendor, between the customer themselves, between a partner they also had in there. And they were like, oh yeah, our operations are like 10 to 3 during the weekdays and none else. Okay, and you need 100% uptime. Yes. Do you see, and you could see the realization dawning going, hold on, what if we have issues outside of that time? And it's those types of things. But anyway, reminiscing mode over. But one of the things I love that you just said there was about the network boundary used to be the security boundary. And that's something I've been saying for years, and those are the kind of tech shows that we've been doing. I'm sure we've heard it said over and over again, and it's just so true. You think about like the Azure portal, you think about your applications, you think about those APIs, and APIs are data effectively, and it's money, it's whatever it's going to be, right? Your API management or whatever. That is all valuable. And the way into that, you can lock things down with networking, lockdowns and private endpoints and whatnot, but at some point, your not minimum viable product, but the lowest hanging fruit, the common denominator, that's the word I'm looking for. The common denominator is going to end up with identity in the cloud, and that's what we work towards, right? So
yeah, it's I remember Phil was Stanley,
I know.
Big shout
I
out
was
to
about
Phil.
to I was about to say the same analogy.
Part of our team.
Go ahead.
And he would always do this kind of well, have you done your risk assessment? Have you done your security assessment? And then one of the things that he would say was that your developers are the biggest attack vector. Like, how do you know what your developers are pushing to production? How do you know if somebody has not written malicious code to harvest usernames and passwords? Boom, suddenly at that point, like the attack can happen from the inside. And recently, or at least in the last few years, we see a lot more attacks happening via social engineering rather than brute force attack at the edge or in the cloud. They still happen. Like, trust me, as soon as you put something in the public domain, it becomes an attack surface for anyone to try. There's so many bots and automation tools out there that will try to test all these different things. So, you put a website out there that will try to do all the usual /admin, PHP admin, just to try to see how they can brute force into things. So default networks and default settings are usually something that most of these tools will try. But beyond that, like, how do you know that your people have not been compromised? At Microsoft, we operate at the zero trust principle, where we assume that every machine has been compromised on the network. And the whole point is to have cutoff gates where, even if your machine gets compromised, how can we stop propagating that worm or that virus or whatever from reaching out the rest of the network? So every device, it's at the edge, and every device is responsible for safeguarding the data and what have you. So identity plays a big part of that, and no matter what you do, because if you do identity right, and unfortunately we're still struggling to get these things right. If you do security right, then you do get these things out of the box for free. So usually when I do user groups and conferences, the first thing I ask is, how many here in the room have tried to deploy their own identity system? How many of you have written your own authentication provider in the room? And usually there are a few hands. I did it in 2007. I wrote my own thing, and it's super hard. You start with, all I have to do is just a username and a password, hash them and store them in my database. Perfect. Some people still confuse hashing and encrypting. Let alone that one, right? And then you start thinking, like, how can I stop brute forcing? How can I stop rainbow attacks to my passwords? How can I do things like incremental backup? So if somebody tries to log in, or they send me a million requests, how is my service going to respond to that? What happens if my database gets compromised? All these different things that you haven't, like, how do I do MFA? Like, doing MFA yourself may sound like a simple thing. Like, you pull a couple of services together and you send stuff via Twilio or Azure Communication Services, but it's super hard, super expensive, and you have to maintain that kind of flow. So from my perspective, when I speak to developers about authentication, then I say, why not let somebody else do it? It's their job. They do it day in, day out. That's all they have to care about. And all you have to do is just integrate with the system. And your customers' data are safe. You are safe, and you can move on to the next task. So rather than taking 3 weeks to write your own identity and authentication, how about we do it in 5 minutes using our libraries and our service? And most of these things are free. It's unbelievable how many people, how many companies have Office 365 and don't realize they have an Azure AD tenant. Like, just blows my mind. But
No, I'm with you. And I think that's, even back when we were doing some of those assessments, again, reminiscing. we should rename the episode to Chris Squared Reminisce. Remember Chris Squared? So, but no, it reminds me, the amount that we would see roll their own identity, and we're like, why would you do that? And you've got all this value that you can go and use. But I guess maybe let's kind of go down that path then. And there are a few different options, right, for me as an end user. I'm coming into a cloud now. I'm looking at Azure and I'm thinking, okay, so I've got Azure AD, cool, I can log into Azure with that. But then I see these things like B2B, I see these things like B2C, and then there's this Azure AD thing as well. Hold on, whoa. Like, I'm
And
confused now.
there's external identity that we added now, just to confuse people even more. Isn't it lovely? So let's try to disambiguate all that. If you are a company that needs to sign in their own users, like enterprise users, so I walk into the office and I need to sign into our internal apps, then in that case you would use Azure AD, right? That's the organizational authentication option. If I am an indie developer, if I have my own company, if I am Coca-Cola or Walmart and I want my customers to come in and shop from my store, then I need to use something like B2C. This is where, I sign in with my username and password or with my Twitter account, and I can go and buy stuff from Costco or whatever, right? So these are the two flavors. One is the Azure AD, which is the organizational stuff. Then you have B2C, which is the business to consumer, business to customer, whatever you want to call it.
Gotcha.
And in effect, what they do is they either authenticate a user or they provide tokens to go and speak to another service.
Right.
So, I authenticate to my front-end web app, and then I need to go and speak to an API, whether that's Graph or SharePoint or OneDrive or my own APIs. I need an access token to get there. And I hate bringing tokens into the whole premise, but, I want to securely access something.
Yes.
Maybe it's not an API. Maybe it's a database.
Sure.
Where I have my account has been provisioned inside Azure AD, and now I can go and access my databases without worrying about that, without the developers worrying about that. For B2C, as I said, we have this kind of, I'm writing a mobile app, I'm writing a game, I'm writing a forum for my cousin that he needs to, have his friends talk about Dungeons and Dragons. How about that? And they need to authenticate
it's not
somehow.
About Dungeons and Dragons.
There you go.
No. It's about Yu-Gi-Oh cards. There you go.
And there you go. And this is where B2C comes into play. Again, you get 50,000 free logins per month. Sorry. So active users.
Gotcha.
50,000 active users. And then you have B2B, and I will very quickly touch upon that.
Yeah.
B2B is about as a company, you want another company to be able to access your data. So in that case, they authenticate via Azure AD as an external vendor, and they can access information inside my tenant, the information I give them access to, or an API or some databases. And they're not part of my org, but they are allowed to access information in my org. So we have these as well. So we have sometimes vendors that work for us as not FTEs, like not full staff, but they come to us. So they have access to some data. They don't get access to the sensitive SharePoint data or roadmap information, but they do have limited access to certain areas. And that's the B2B scenario. You want somebody to use your organizational data without having full access to that.
Makes sense. So I guess then we are almost looking at the use case of because you're not going to have a one size fits all, right? And I think that's the other important point. It's requirements driven. Here we go. It's all about what scenario you're trying to tackle. So from what I was hearing, it sounds like three kind of distinct scenarios. One is like the truly internal app, and you don't really particularly care about. Not particularly care, that's the wrong way of saying it, but everyone's equal almost in that sense, and you've got that internal Azure AD tenant. You've then got the B2C where it's like, hey, bring your own identities from those external parties, and those third-party providers will authenticate via those and store some representation of you, but you still have to authenticate via that provider. It's not a separate login. And then you've got the B2B, which is more of a, hey, you've already got an identity over there. We'll just go and use that as part of this solution that we're kind of building here.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And I guess then,
and hopefully that's enough. Like when we speak to developers, or people want to keep it very simple, because all these things can do amazing stuff, right? It's like you buy something and you usually only use 5%. Why would you want to know the rest of 95%, right? So as a developer, you might be looking at, hey, how can I authenticate users with their username and password or their Twitter account? Perfect. You can do that out of the box in 5 minutes. Now you can do some really advanced things with the tool, but when we talk about B2C, when we talk about the identity providers, we want to simplify that. And now we talked about how developers can be an attack vector into your
Yes.
organization and how you want to keep your cloud solution secure. One of the things that underpins that, especially in Azure, is something that we called Azure Managed Identities, which again, it works. It uses Azure AD behind the scenes. But if I have a web app running, say, on Azure that needs to speak to a SQL database, in the old traditional way, you would have a connection string that allows these things to communicate with each other. That connection string needs to be stored somewhere. You might say, well, we're going to use Key Vault, but now to access Key Vault, you still need to securely access Key Vault in order to get the secrets out. So there's always this kind of a lowest common denominator, which is a key that allows you to access something.
Yeah.
What we did with Managed Identities was eliminate the whole thing. So you actually create an account inside Azure AD that says this account has very limited permissions. It allows one application or one resource to access another resource, and that's all it can do. No ability to go to my storage account. It will only access my SQL database, and then within SQL database, it will have very limited permissions. Now that managed identity is all managed by Azure. So as a developer, I don't have to care about how that gets implemented. All I care about is using that managed identity to securely access services.
Yes.
And that's perfect because it works across the board. It works on your local development environment. So you're technically using a managed identity, but you're not using a managed identity. You use your local authenticated user via various means. And there are libraries that allow you to fall back into different mechanisms. So you can use Visual Studio logins, Visual Studio Code logins, the Azure CLI login. We'll try to find all these things. So once it finds an account, it goes, oh, I have a token, or I need to get a new token for this user to access the data. So as a developer, I don't need to know how these things are running. All I know is I'm speaking to a service on Azure without writing any secrets or anything else anywhere. And then when I deploy to my QA or production environment, that thing propagates across. Again, no code changes. You just say I'm deploying to a new environment. I'm using a different identity, i.e. a managed identity, and it does it for you. So from a developer perspective, it becomes amazing. From an enterprise perspective, it becomes super awesome because they don't have to worry about their developers having access to sensitive data. And again, reminiscing to the past, we knew developers that had access to production environments. We knew developers that wiped out resources in production because they accidentally thought they were in the QA environment.
I tell that story so often. Honestly, I've done 3 governance sessions this week with customers, and I've told that story in each one, actually. Yeah.
And then you have the malicious developers where they get fired and they encrypt the database and they leave. Now, good luck trying to recover data. I think it was in the San Francisco City Council where they fired a DBA, and as he was getting fired, he was allowed to go back to his desk. So he encrypted the database and he left. So for about I think it was like 3 months, everybody was allowed to travel freely in their public transport because they had no way for them to run the system and charge.
Wow.
Yeah, it was probably about 5-6 years ago. It was insane. And this guy was taken to court. Now, fine, you take him to court, you fine him with dollars. I don't know. Let's say $100,000.
Yeah.
He can still not give up the key, right? Like, I'm taking it to my grave. Good luck with you guys. Now, disaster recovery is an important thing, but also, safeguarding your sensitive data from that kind of behavior is important. So I'm not saying everyone is malicious, but things happen. Like my machine can get compromised. I have access to my Azure production tenant. Suddenly, that account becomes an attack vector.
Absolutely.
So identity is hard, as you can see.
No, completely. And I think one of the things that's interesting just listening to all of that there, we're talking about things like managed service identities and relying upon the objects inside of Azure AD, basically, and the permissions, not worrying about connection strings anymore. We're looking at things like insiders, giving them the right permissions, principles of least privilege. So many things relate to those common practices that are not really things that have changed. They're things that we've known about all along and things that people should be doing, like don't check your passwords and your connection strings in source control. All of these common base principles that we expect. And I think one thing that is different is kind of the way that identity works in the cloud. Because if you've got any kind of hardcore identity experts coming from that on-prem world, they're probably thinking, Kerberos and all of these other fun protocols, right? LDAP and all these kind of things. But it's not quite the same, right, when you talk about identity in the cloud. And by no means are we going to do a whole deep session on this, but maybe at a very high level, what would you kind of explain, something like OAuth or OpenID Connect or something like that, just in terms of like tokens and how that works at a very high level, just to make sure we're not losing people, I guess.
Yeah, and sometimes we avoid talking about tokens. We avoid talking about this kind of functionality. Like, do people really need to know about protocols or how things work? Some of them do, but there is this case of, I don't really want to know about what protocol is used behind the scenes. All I care about is how quickly can I integrate my app into my solution. Like, if I'm going to use Azure AD, what do I need to do in my app to make it happen? And luckily, we have all the libraries that wrap around these super complex scenarios. So, authenticating, caching tokens, refreshing your tokens, and what have you, all managed by MSAL, which is the Microsoft Authentication Libraries that we have for all different languages and frameworks, which is great. But if we want to talk a little bit about tokens, and I don't want to get too much in depth, because again, once you start talking about these things, people like switch off. Like, I don't care about these things, right? Yeah, there's no care burst, there's no LDAP anymore. That's absolutely right. I mean, .NET developers had it so easy back in the on-prem days.
Yeah.
You would write an app, and it would just tap into care burst and LDAP, and it was just done. You don't have to worry about authentication. You're running it on your machine. It's connect the network. It's working. Now in the cloud space, web apps, mobile apps, APIs don't work in the same way. So we needed a way to make that happen.
Right.
The Microsoft Identity Platform is built on top of open standards. So we adopted OpenID Connect, and we adopted OAuth 2. And the whole point there is that, you can use MSAL, and we recommend people using MSAL if they have greenfield projects. Like, I'm just starting with Identity. I'm just starting with Identity. I'm writing a Node app. I need to authenticate. How do I do it with Microsoft? Right, I'm using MSAL. But it could be a scenario where I'm coming from on-prem or from a different identity provider.
Yeah.
I already have my library. I feel super confident about it. I don't want to strip it out. As long as it's OpenID Connect compliant, it will allow you to speak to our endpoints and get your tokens and your, validate incoming tokens and make sure that you implement it correctly.
Yeah.
So we tap into existing standards, which are OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect.
Yep.
But other than that, I don't want people to spend 4 months understanding what OpenID Connect is and looking at RFCs.
No, I think
a token is a token. The big difference is that when you authenticate in the cloud, when you authenticate with the Microsoft Identity Platform, you don't do it within your app. That's the biggest key, right? I have a web app running on my environment, whether that's on-prem or AWS or Google Cloud or Azure. The user needs to sign in, so they are redirected to the Azure AD or B2C tenant. They authenticate there, and then the identity provider responds back with a token. It doesn't bring back the user information the same way. You don't have to store anything in your application. It allows you to get that information that you need for the user, whether it's login through Twitter or logging through Azure AD. It usually contains some information in plains. So you can have your name, maybe your organizational location if you're doing line of business apps, some group permissions and some roles, and that's all you care in your application to do. And then you either pass the access token to the next downstream API, or you use it in your application if it's an ID token. And I think that's the extent that most people want to care about when it comes to identity. Like, I had to learn about OAuth and OpenID Connect because I'm working with this one, but talking about scalability, I always bring this number up when I speak to developers. Like, let's say you want to write your own solution. Fine. How many logins are you going to handle? Let's say that your app takes off and suddenly have lots of logins happening in. At Microsoft Identity Platform with Azure AD, we're doing over 8 billion logins a day. That's an insane number if you think about it. We have 1,500 engineers working on the identity platform, working to make sure that you are secure enough. So all you have to do is just add a few lines of code, and then off you go. Now think about it, 8 billion authentications a day. That's an insane amount of number. I had to double check that with marketing and our leadership, because this is a number that we're publicly sharing. So this is a verified number, not just random things.
333 million an hour if you take it as a kind of across every hour equally. Of course, it's not going to be, but wow, every day. That's a lot. That's a lot.
And why is this important? It's not the volume that matters. It's the data that comes with that.
Right.
Where are these logins coming from? Why are they coming to us? we can quickly identify patterns and protect you against attacks before you even know it.
Yes.
We recently released this thing called Not Me, or It Wasn't Me, where if you go into My Apps and then look into your logins on your Microsoft account, you can see where your logins came from, which app logged in, which time, and from where. So if something is not fitting a pattern, then suddenly, like, you can't be in Germany and the UK at the same time and logging in from two different apps.
Right.
So we will flag that to you. You get an email saying, we just identified an irregular login to your tenant. Why? Is that you? How can that be you? Right. So, we proactively reach out to you to help you, even as a consumer, to protect against things, because, Office will log in behind the scenes, Teams will log in behind the scenes, your Outlook logs behind the scenes, your phone has all these apps that log at the same time. So suddenly if somebody steals your phone and goes to Germany, right, you can actually realize, oh, shit, I lost my phone. I mean, I don't think that's a possible scenario, but most people are attached on their phone too much. But it's these things that you get out for free. MFA for free. You don't have to do anything. Conditional access, all for free, all implemented for you. I'm sure I'll be super hard pressed to meet somebody that says, well, your identity provider does not meet my requirements as a company or as a user, or as a developer.
There is so much.
So please don't roll out your own authentication. If you take anything out of today, it's like, please use an identity provider to do your job. And it's not because I'm getting paid for it, but because I don't want you to be in the news for the bad.
And that's exactly it, right? I think that's always kind of the way we approached it. But again, Chris reminisce. Back when we were talking about with these customers was, how do you make sure you don't end up on the front page of the big whichever daily newspaper you read because, you've been breached or all of your accounts have been leaked or whatever. And, it happens. And it's like we said earlier, it's being able to operate under that kind of breach scenario and thinking, right, we've been breached rather than waiting to be breached. And I think that's what this gives you, right, is this ability to almost not have to think as much about that. It's still certainly your responsibility. It's still certainly something you have to care about, but not the entire stack. There's so much underneath that Microsoft or Auto or Okta or whoever deal with for you, and then you just deal with the kind of application layer and those bits on the top. And it takes a lot of that kind of headache away. And I think, there's so much value that things like Azure AD will give you just from the app dev side of things as well. Like everything we've been talking about with tokens, JWT is how it's done, right? And as you say, industry standard, that's just how it works. And we were talking just before we went live, right, about an app that I mentioned about the Yu-Gi-Oh cards a bit earlier, but this multi-tenanted kind of website that I'm trying to build with, if I'm a user, I want to go and inventory my application, I can log in with Facebook or Twitter or Gmail or whichever account that I want to log in with. I don't care. But I just don't want to manage your identity. I'm not responsible for that. I'll just deal with the app layer on the top that I know is all dealt with in the right way. The rest of it, Microsoft can deal with it. That's fine.
Exactly. We take the onus and responsibility of managing user data, and then you are responsible for just integrating. And we know that identity is like item 15 out of the 30 different items that you have to implement.
Even though it shouldn't be, to be fair. Probably shouldn't be that low.
And like, I mean, I'm like, you're giving a task or a set of tasks for this sprint, and you're told, oh, you're doing the authentication component or the authorization. Like, oh man, like we wanted to be like, let's do this. If you are working with .NET Core today, for example, we managed to reduce the amount of code to 4 lines. Microsoft Identity Web has taken the whole authentication, whether you're writing an API. And I know if you've ever done any APIs with .NET before, the amount of code they had to write to validate the tokens, validate the permissions, make sure that your token has the right claims and what have you, has been eliminated to single liners. We abstracted all that complexity, and we made it so easy to authenticate your tokens and call a downstream API, add a cache, 3 lines of code.
Gotcha.
It's amazing. And we're actually trying to adopt the same model for other languages like Node and Python and Ruby. We want it to be simple. We want it to be like, I want to abstract the complexity, and I want to be able to implement it as quickly as possible. Now, if I need to dig into things that happen at the token creation, or when I need to validate a token or add additional claims, we do give you access to those APIs behind the scenes. But right now, we want people to not have to think about identity so hard. We want them to be like, hey, I need to implement something. How quickly can I get off the ground and make it right and do it securely and move on? So, that's our goal, demystifying and making identity something that anyone can work with without having super in-depth knowledge about protocols and frameworks and what have you.
Awesome. Good. No, I'm behind it. Like I said earlier, I've got this kind of very high summary for anyone listening, and maybe if you're interested, we can do a separate session on it. If anyone's interested, let me know. But .NET Core based backend, all serverless Azure functions, front end using Azure Storage, CDN, uses Azure Search as well, B2C. And then I'm using custom policies of B2C. So then when a user signs up, they get a representation in Cosmos DB created for them. So that's their inventory. And then if I choose to globally replicate it later because it takes off and it's so successful, easy. I can go and scale out the stamps as a geode or something.
There you go.
So yeah.
And you don't have to think about scalability at any point because Azure Function Storage, Cosmos, everything runs in a scalable manner.
Yep.
So all you have to care about is creating a nice user experience, which I suck at. So I'm so happy I don't have to create this kind of projects.
I'm no better. I'm just getting the minimum viable product.
I have a very good friend, Tom Woods, back in the UK. Yeah. Every time I was asked to create something for customers, especially when I was consulting, we would do all these different ventures.
Yeah.
I would bring him on because he's an amazing designer and he knows his colors. Like I have 3 basic colors I use, like black, white, blue, whatever. Right? He was always the one that would bring the color and the design. So he would do the HTML, CSS skin, and I would add the code behind the scenes. So we're always marrying the two. And this guy was awesome, right?
Yeah.
But I would never have been able to do anything decent without his support.
Yeah, I can do some good like boxes and squares, that typical dev UI design. I'm great at that.
Yes, straight line.
Yeah, exactly. Who wants curves or anything else? Who needs that? Anyway, we digress. So I guess just looking at time and thinking, kind of wrapping us up and thinking about everything we've spoken about. What are maybe some of the common pitfalls, common areas you see people falling into when they're going down that identity path, maybe that you'd want to kind of steer people away from, or just make sure that, if there are big things that you want people to take away from what we've talked about today, apart from us reminiscing, of course.
Obviously, yeah. Although I think with all this nostalgia, you might want to join our team here. We have some open positions. So let me know if you're interested. We can be Chris Squared again.
There we go.
Right. In all seriousness, what do I want people to take out of this conversation today? First of all, please do not write your own identity systems. Use something that's out there. They're very well written and designed to help you scale. Second would be, if you are running on Azure, make sure that you know about things like managed identity, which can definitely protect and secure your services without you having to add any secrets. Because that's the second attack vector, right? Once I can't get access to your users, then I will try to attack your infrastructure. And usually in that infrastructure, there might be a file or a config setting somewhere or an environment variable that has something secret. We don't want people to fall into that pit of failure. We want people to fall in the pit of success, as my partner in crime, JP, says. And sometimes I think we're trying to come up with a meme where we actually like kick somebody. Have you seen 300?
Yes,
where,
yes, yeah.
The pit of success is where Leonidas is sitting right outside Sparta, and then the messenger comes in and he kicks him into. We want our developers to fall or be kicked into the pit of success, because that's how strongly we feel about identity. Although that doesn't bring some really good,
I was going to say, I'm not sure on the visuals of that right now. Try to imagine it.
Drag them into Microsoft. No, we want you to come at your own volition. No pressure. So managed identities, if you're running on the cloud, super important. If you're actually developing for the cloud, it should be an end-to-end experience. That's very important. Then secure DevOps, again, it's a component of that. Yeah. So make sure you use service principles, whether you're running on GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps or any other tool. If you're deploying to an environment, make sure you secure your pipeline.
And
because that's another attack vector.
To add on to that as well, we spoke about principle of least privilege and everything earlier. I see because DevOps is my thing, right? I see so many people going down the path of building an amazing governance practice for their users, And then you look at their pipelines and they go, yeah, we gave it contributor access to the whole management group. You did what? Or we gave it owner
or
access.
The whole subscription.
Yeah, it's like, why? And I think it's the same thing there, right? Is when we're thinking about DevOps or DevSecOps, treat that just as any other object, just like your managed identities as well, I guess, is probably how you look at that. Sorry, I jumped in, mate, but you got me excited. You mentioned the D word, DevOps.
Fine. I mean, funny enough that you talk about it, because last week we built, or JP built an extension to the GitHub Actions that now allows you to run with managed identities. So you can have your agents running inside a container or a VM that uses managed identities. So your deployment runs via managed identity, so you don't have to have any secrets inside your pipeline.
Nice.
How awesome is that?
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get that
cool
accepted as a PR, and then people will be able to use either Service Principal or a managed identity.
Awesome. Yeah, let me know when that comes out, because we can make sure that anyone listening gets that as a follow-up then in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll pass the information.
Awesome.
So the summary is identity can be super tricky, but we want it to be super simple for you and super easy to implement. And I know we shouldn't be using simple and easy, because they're antithesis, especially for someone starting. But if you use the right libraries, if you use the right services, it should take very little effort to implement authentication into your solutions, no matter the language, no matter the framework, no matter the cloud, and move on and do some other stuff, like add value to your business by creating a solution. So if you have any problems, reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you be successful in that space. And hopefully we'll see you online, either on our channel, on Twitch, or via our blogs. Make sure just 4 to 5 so on Tweets and dev.io.
We are. It's reminded me back of the days when we were on the same wavelength, because I changed the screen over. You can't see, but I changed the screen view over to your blog again just as you started saying that. It's like we're mind melded again. It's awesome. This is what happens when we catch up. Awesome.
So many memories.
Exactly.
Man. So many memories. I mean, it was great working with you, and hopefully we can work again in the future. If you have any customers that need help with identity, then we're here to help out.
And for anyone listening, if you feel that maybe it's been a bit either too high level or not deep enough, you know where to go. The 4 to 5 show, that's going to be a great place for you to get your identity fix. And if you want to dive deeper into any of those pieces, Christos is there. We've flashed up on screen a few times his Twitter details, etc. So go ahead and tweet him. He's very active on Twitter as well. So all there is to say, sir, is thank you very much. Thank you for joining. I've had a lot of fun with this. I'm rubbish at multitasking. I was trying to change screen as we were talking. But I've had a lot of fun doing this. And definitely, I'm sure we'll find another topic that we can come back and do again. So thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Hey, likewise, thanks for having me. And if you ever want to come to our show as well and talk about architecture and what you're doing with customers,
absolutely,
we're always open.
Absolutely, would love to do that.
Perfect.
Excellent. Cool. So, let's wrap up then, folks. So, we've had a great session there talking about all things identity, right? So identity isn't something we've typically focused on, but you can see we've just scratched the surface on really what we can cover there. So there's a great resource out there with the 4 to 5 show. Definitely take a look. I know that Christos and team are really heavily investing in that and putting a lot of work into making sure that it's great, and those community hours are going to be very valuable. So do go ahead and take a look. Of course, you've seen it pop up on screen a few times there as well, but there are my details there again. Red Oboen on Twitter, Chris Reddington on GitHub as well, and of course Cloud with Chris, and you can go and see me on www.cloudwithchris.com there as well, and we'll just switch back over there so you can see that. If you have topics that you want to see, you've got the suggested topic on the top of the site there. You've also got the become a guest, which we are doing some tweaks to. So if there is anything, just give us a shout. But until then, thank you for tuning in. And please do like, please do subscribe. And thank you for watching. Until next time, bye for now.